Welcome to the Win All Day Everyday podcast presented by Prairie Hockey Academy. Justin, Happy New Year. It's unbelievable that we're at this point of the year already and ready to kick off a great 2024.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Barrett. It's been it's a great Christmas season, and I mean here we are again with a fantastic guest to kick off our new year.
Yeah, I mean I don't know what you got to over the Christmas holidays, but I had a great opportunity to take my family. Went to see my dad in Medicine Hat and over the Rocky Mountains to see my mom in Castlegar, and then zip back and flew my son back to Vancouver, and it just feels like been on the road, been making the miles this Christmas.
Well, when all your kids are at your house, you get to travel and see them. Mine are at home, so we still do the Christmas morning there, and we changed things up a bit. We didn't do our traditional, whether it's North American or not traditional, but the turkey Christmas. We actually did a prime rib, and I'm not certain I'm going back to turkey.
Okay, there you go. Well, we're really deep into the seasons of our podcast, and we had some great episodes over the Christmas holidays. Even though our athletes took some breaks and scattered in the middle of December to go and spend time with their families, and everyone's getting ready to come back and get ready for the 2024 push towards the playoffs and whatnot. But we haven't taken any breaks from the podcast, and we've had these great episodes, like I said, all throughout December. And today we're very fortunate to have with us a guest from overseas, but doesn't mean that his impact is over there only. He's an individual, a gentleman that's worked 16 years in the high performance coaching industry. He is the founder of Men Behind Sport. He's worked with F1. He's worked with the Olympics, so 3 different Olympic years in 12, 16, and 18. English Institute of Sport. The list goes on, and he's even launching today his own podcast as well. So,
right. Yeah.
We're really thankful to have you on the show today, Richard. Our guest with us today is Mr. Richard Husseiny. Thank you for coming on.
Happy New Year, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure, and I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, well, thank you for like I said, the impact that you've had in sport. Justin and I are both coming at it from Justin as a founder within sport and spent lots of time coaching, and myself as a high performance coach for the last 30 years. So I'm really intrigued to have you on board, because a lot of stuff I'm sure that we're going to talk about probably I needed to hear about 20 years ago myself. So looking forward to hearing some of your comments and just some of your journey through sport as well.
Yeah, like I said at the start, it kind of is an open book, so we can go anywhere you want.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think one piece for our listeners here on the podcast, and that is that at the Win All Day Everyday podcast, we're oftentimes talking about just concepts inside of sport that can help our high performance athletes out, that can help families that lead these high performance athletes, and then coaches as well. And at the same time, we're starting to really dig into some of the mental health and working on like how can we be more upstream, right? When we talk about win all day, every day, we're not talking about, stole this from your website, this idea of better never stops, but actually what are the practices that we can use every single day in our habits, starting a new year in January. So our daily habits, our disciplines, our maybe it's our approach to our eating habits or anything to win all day, every day. And I think winning all day, every day really also consists of being present, showing up where you need to show up for your family or for your teammates or those you lead. And so I think that's where we intersect with you, coming across some of your work on Men Behind Sport, just really resonated with me. And maybe tell us a little bit about Men Behind Sport. What's its purpose? Who is Richard, and why do you exist, and what gives you passion every day?
So I suppose, to start, before Men Behind Sport, I was a strength and conditioning coach by trade. And so, grateful to work with the organizations and teams I did in England and in China. And up until 2014, I was laser focused on my career. And all I mean by that is nothing else mattered outside of my life. Like my life was work. I was a strength and conditioning coach. It was me. Like, it was a massive part of my identity. Was my identity. And so the validation I got, or the boost to my ego I got when I said I work for these teams or these athletes or whatever it was. And so the transformational moment in my life came at the end of 2014. So I was working in China at the time, like I said, with Exos, and my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so I left China and came back home to give my mum end of life care. And as sad as that is, of course, has been the most transformational, probably one of the top, couple of transformational experiences of my life. And really what that did for me really is gave me a massive spiritual awareness. And all I mean by that on a fundamental level is just awareness of self. Why do I think this? Why do I do that? Kind of just really started to drive me inwards into myself to begin to question, what am I doing here? And really, like when, it was a privilege to be at the end of life for my mum and also my dad. My dad died at 16, when I was 16. Because it really showed me like, oh, I'm going to die one day. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Sorry. And I don't have those answers, but it's just put me on the question. And so what it really showed me was, for the first time, I could see I had a very, very low self-worth. And I could boost myself a little bit with the jobs or the teams, like I said before, and drove kind of really quite negative patterns in myself, and which I couldn't see before. I thought I was dedicated to my job. Example would be also my training, the way I used to train myself. I'd drive myself into the ground. Like I knew better, but I didn't take my own advice. And I ended up, so my mum died in 2015. In 2017, I was told that my body had an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's, and I had half my thyroid removed out of my body. And then I was told I'd be on medication for the rest of my life. And which, side note, I've healed that on my own and I'm not on medication anymore. And that's a different discussion, I suppose. But kind of this process of really breaking down physically, breaking down emotionally, and also just breaking who I thought I was. And so I was not interested in looking at research anymore, like performance research. I was not interested in working in, it seems so just not human. The human side to sport, it just wasn't there. And I couldn't see that before. And it just wasn't resonating with me at all. And so I left coaching in 2018 after the Pyeongchang Olympics, and I was let go, actually, which was a massive dent to my ego again. However, it was such an amazing thing. And I didn't think I'd venture into sport again. Obviously, over the years, and I was working in this type of space, but not in sport. And only at the end of 2021, I started to reach out to some old colleagues and old friends, and then reach out to further afield people I didn't know. And it turned into this research project that I'm not an academic. This is not a PhD. This is not kind of funded by anyone. It's just off my own back. And it turns out I've had 160 conversations now with male practitioners and coaches from all domains. So from head coach, performance directors, physiologists, S&C coaches, physical therapists, like the whole lot. From around the world, from England, and all different organizations, teams, sports, 17 different sports, 11 countries. And it just blown me away to hear the stories of many of these people who are very subjectively or successful in their career. So they've got the titles, they're leading with a department, they've supported athletes to reach certain medals or championships. And yet there's this deep unhappiness within them. Either they're not fulfilled by what they do. A common statement I've heard, and this is paraphrased, of course, but a common statement would be, I've supported athletes to reach Olympic success or championship success, and I've waited this emotional rush to hit, and it hasn't come. Why? I thought this is what I do. I thought this is why we do what we do. And it's put many coaches on this spiral of like, well, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? What's going on? And solely focus on the objective measures of success, the shiny things, the medals, the accolades, the presentations, the medals, and I'm not disregarding that. That's part of it, but very few are connected to what drives them internally, and then really that's the basis to Men Behind Sport. That's where Men Behind Sport has come from, to really support practitioners to stop developing athletes at the expense of themselves, to find a way to create some form of harmony between their life and their career. I think balance is a misleading term. I don't believe it's a perfect balance, because there's this undulating kind of, like different competitions, tournaments, times of phases of season, for example. But it's this like, okay, how can I course correct? I need to come back over this way, rather than just being so over devoted into the sport that it's catastrophic to their health, their relationships, their whatever it is, and it's really that's really the basis to Men Behind Sport.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think, even like you said, there's these seasons, right? Tournaments and events and that where there won't be that balance, because you might be competing 12 hours in that day. never mind your preparation and everything and your post game. But I find sometimes when we come down from that as a coach, or we come home from that, we don't come down from that. So we're at home and we're looking to find a way to keep ourselves busy still, almost because we feel like we need to be starting now to prepare for that next competition, even while we're at home. And I think that's where we have to tilt that back and go, okay, I've been away. How do I connect here? Right?
Yes. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting you say that, we don't come down. One of the common things that's come through from my research process has been, many can't be present. Again, another statement that stood out to me was, even when I'm home, I'm not home with them. Mm-hmm. And whether that's, like you said, always thinking about what's next, whether it's the stage of cycle season, whether it's their own personal development, what role they're going to get next. And also, even when success, in the terms of forms of winning, or promotion or whatever it is, very few can actually enjoy that. They're always like, well, there's pressure on now, right? I need to maintain this, or I need to do better, or I need to, rather than just enjoying, wow, we've done this. This is great. And yeah, it's a deep, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, for sure. And I maybe I'll just relay a quick story and then ask you some advice out of it. But a few years ago, I was coaching at Trinity Western University, and we had the opportunity to compete in a few championships. One year we lost the final game of the championship with 7.2 seconds on the clock. It was devastating. I remember sitting in the hallway crying, and just being so focused from that moment on to be, how can we be 7.2 seconds better? And then the next year we actually won. We dominated in the championship. I think we won the final game 8-2. And I couldn't honestly enjoy the moment. And I even in my post-game celebratory talk with my players said, fellas, enjoy this game tonight, or enjoy this celebration tonight, because tomorrow we're defending champions. We got to figure out how to defend this. I couldn't even enjoy the moment. It was ridiculous that, here, for 24 months, I was on 10 out of 10 in terms of just being so driven and focused that everything else around me was a casualty. And so my question to you, as you've worked with and talked to, with athletes and coaches in 11 different countries and multiple different sports, we're seeing it here in hockey in North America. Coaches are having that same misguidance, and they're crumbling. They're crumbling under the pressure to the point where they're just getting kicked out of the game for being idiots. Are you seeing the same thing over in Europe and to the outside of hockey, the teams and sports that you've talked to?
I mean, now my focus, I guess another key thing to my men behind sport, my focus is now not athlete facing at all. It's all coach and practitioner facing. So what I do see is exactly that, many coaches are achieving, but there's such pressure to keep that going. And I think one of the driving factors of that, there's no arguing that sport is a results driven. It's just results driven. It is, which is underpinned by money, of course. Mm-hmm. And so, if teams or sports or athletes fail, there is usually a cut in funding if it's an Olympic type of sport, or there's a change of staff, which then sits underneath that, this insecurity of livelihood. That's what we're talking about, livelihood of earning. And I know that we can relate that to identity. We can relate that to lots of different things as well, which are key drivers from what I see anyway. But there's that, I need to keep this job because that's feeding my family, or that's keeping my roof over my head. And so that's a sticky place to be. And there's no doubt about it. And from what I'm seeing, I guess the trend that you can see, that it's not just what I've done, but if you look at professional soccer. So, I guess an example I like to use is either Alex Ferguson. Do you know Alex Ferguson?
Yes.
Very, very famous football manager in Europe, Scottish, who I think was in Manchester United 16 years. And so when he took over Manchester United, they're not doing very well. They continued to not do very well. But he was building. It was part of a bigger vision, a bigger vision of what was happening here. But he had the leeway or the space to make mistakes and to not win all the time, because that's just part of the process. Whereas now, what it seems like, certainly in soccer, there's such a small window of impact and success. So, for example, there's Callum Walsh, who is doing wonderful work in this space in soccer. I know it's something different to hockey, but the idea that a new manager will come in, will have around about 6 games to make an impact. If they don't make that impact, then the stats are saying that they're going to be let go. So then, where is the space to have this creative kind of value-driven culture? Because it's so small, narrow-minded that I think ties into what you're saying. Can't enjoy the win because, well, we'll have to keep winning because otherwise I'll lose my job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Gino, I'm trying to remember his last name now. I think he's the head coach of University of Connecticut women's basketball, NCAA Division I. I believe the U.S. Olympic team as well, women's basketball team. And like very decorated, wins national championships all the time. He was interviewed in this event a few years back, and he had just won another national championship, and they were talking about exactly this internal strife.
Right.
And he said, how did you feel after winning? Relieved.
Right.
I didn't feel any joy, just relief.
Right.
Right. And I think this is part of it is how do we, how do we get continue to keep the love in the game? I mean, we're talking about a game, and it's a sport that as young men, we grew to love and we wanted to pursue it and have this opportunity to keep the camaraderie of that team environment and be involved as coaches or practitioners because we want to be a part of that team. And there's a lot of writing out there, right? Ryan Holiday, the ego is the enemy, there's lots of writing about this stuff, about our ego, about self-awareness, about how we need to, but the writing doesn't do the hard work that's required. And that hard work can be pretty scary. And Richard, I think you've done a lot of that, and you continue to with your Men Behind Sport with others. And I think a lot of that's reflection based, right? Maybe talk about that. Like we've got a lot of young coaches. We have about 15 coaches that work with us at Prairie Hockey Academy, but there's a lot of young coaches on our that are listeners as well. And what's some basic things they can start doing to do some of that hard work?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's that discomfort you're talking about. I think first of all, I can give you my experience. I said about the training. So on one hand, how do you numb yourself? We all numb ourselves: social media, drinking, partying, whatever. Whatever activity. Training for me, it was drinking, which is culturally accepted, by the way, isn't it? Kind of going and get some beers, have too many beers, and it's almost seen as a badge of honor to go and just get wasted.
Right.
But a more insidious one for me was training. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see that I was using my exercise to numb myself. It was only after reflection and I had this space afterwards. I could see this period of this time after I trained and I buried myself in some ridiculous session I did. I had this space of silence, of peace, inner peace. But then the inner voice would start again. And I suppose the first place I would start and direct people is really, I guess the process I guide people through is 3 phases. So the first one, how do you show up? How are you being? What's going on for you? What's your behaviors? What are your actions? What's driving those? Just to be aware of I'm making that decision again. Because you said it's one thing to read it in a book. It's one thing to read all these wonderful bits of wisdom out there, or knowledge, but to turn it into wisdom requires you to act on it and to bring it into your life in a way that resonates with you. I think taking information and using it in a way that really works for you is important. And at the same time, at some point, you've got to start somewhere, and it's just about being comfortable being uncomfortable. In my example of exercising or over-exercising, it was about feeling that desire to go and train and not train, sitting with it. That's kind of the base level. That's where I started. And that just opened a door to a layer upon layer of different awareness of there's so many things we're blind to. Until you look for them, they'll remain blind. And it's a challenging process. But I think that, how do you show up? So the idea components would be self-regulation. How do you regulate yourself? When you feel your emotions, which are all, healthy. Anger is a very healthy emotion. I bring up anger because I think as men in general, we have, generally speaking, we have 2 emotions that are kind of celebrated. We have aggression, especially in sport, aggression and physicality, explosive anger, which comes out when we repress it, or there's banter, and so an English term maybe, which is, joking around, kind of that type of stuff. And so, but we all feel shame, fear, sadness, grief, kind of all the emotion. We have this joy, love, like gratitude. We all feel all these emotions, but this is not fault. And this is one of the key things that stood out from my conversations is many men, generally speaking, are emotionally unskilled. And I classed myself in that as well years ago. Just the idea of we aren't used to expressing how we feel. And so, that might show up then. So self-regulation is, do you explode? Do you overreact to things? Is there, the idea of like, the straw that broke the camel's back, some small thing invokes this huge reaction. Like, to me, bring that to, like, be aware of that and just be curious about that.
Right.
Your thinking process, so much. We humans are wonderful, and we make up stories all the time. So much is based on assumption. How can you get clear with that? An example would be, we've all sent that text message or WhatsApp message, and we've seen the double ticks, blue two ticks, and they've read it. Oh, but they haven't got back to me. Why haven't they got back to me? They're being rude. They don't think they think I've said something wrong. They don't like me. They're just ignoring me. They can't be bothered. Like the story, the still story.
Sure.
That's not true. What we do know for sure is they've read it and they haven't got back to me yet. And that's just giving a silly example of the storytelling that we tell ourselves. And I think, how are you taking personal responsibility for your reality? So again, another example for me would be, I was someone that used to kind of like, in the departments I used to work in, we haven't got this equipment. The environment's like this. The athletes do this, kind of external blaming. And in my personal relationships as well, she does this. Why can't I meet someone that doesn't do that? And I meet someone else, blah, blah, blah. And it was this realization, all these dots lined up. And it was looking at me like, I'm the fixed variable here. No, everyone else is different. I'm the same. Like, oh no. That means I have to look at it was just like, I guess I should look at myself now then. And that's what I mean by taking personal responsibility. Like, just give you an example. And kind of, we could leave it there. I guess the second level is you're in a compass. And so, or the key question to how you show up is, what do I think? The second level, you're in a compass. The key question is, what do I want? So getting clear on values, your needs, your wants, your belief systems. It's one thing to be clear on values, and not, in my experience, not many are really clear on their values. But then once you're clear on your values, how aligned are you to those values? Are you living to those values, or is there part of the environment that is asking you, or you don't feel confident to live authentically to those values? And so that is where people get unstuck a lot. And the idea of, certainly in coaches, the environments are very often requiring them to live outside of alignment with their values, which drives a whole other issues, frustration, unfulfillment, resentment, which obviously comes into boundaries. How do we set our boundaries? Are we okay at conflict? And in my experience, and it'd be great to hear what you think, but like, performance and achieving great things requires the moving parts of people in a department to have differing opinions sometimes. And that's a positive. But many of us don't know how to have that conflict in a healthy way. We take it personally rather than, I don't agree with what you're saying there. How can we work together to create a solution for the good of all?
Yeah.
And that's a skill, but I was never taught that at school. And I think that comes down to, what was modeled to us as younger, and not that I my parents were doing the best they could with what they had, and that's the way it is. And it's just, how can we navigate away from that? That's kind of how I see it now anyway. And then the third level is your inner freedom. So what do I commit to? Kind of a tying in with values and alignment to those values, but your purpose, your vision,
right?
And for me, that comes into more of a spiritual side. Like I'm so much more than a coach. I'm not, that's part of who I am. And in fact, we're talking about identity and purpose. I used to think my purpose was to be a strength and conditioning coach in Olympic sport. to me now, I see purpose as it is my job is a vehicle for me to fulfill my purpose. It's not my purpose. So just gives you, that's how I think about
powerful.
it anyway.
There's so much there to unpack. We could probably, on each of those 3 points, we could probably have a separate episode on it. So, like I'd said earlier, we over here in North America, we've seen lots of coaches in multiple sports sort of get lost on that journey, right? Whether it's just not having alignment with their values, or they just lost focus, or in reality, it's at the end of the day, they just don't have an identity, or their true identity. Their identity is, I'm the head coach of this team, and so this team traditionally wins, and so I've got to win. So that's who I am. But then it blows up because they're not aligned to their values, and they have nothing to back that up. And so I know that we've seen that. I've journeyed that in my own life. From your experience and the work that you're doing with Men Behind Sport, some advice that you might sort of drip onto coaches, young coaches, old coaches, male, female, that helps them turn that page, and like, how do they hit the reset button? When you're playing, some game like a NHL on Xbox or whatever, and you have a bad game, you can just hit the reset button. From your experience in the work that you've done in sport, how can a coach hit the reset button and find their real identity and build from there?
Yeah, I mean, there's some untangling to do, and see it as a process. It's not a quick switch. And I would say, on one level, how you show up. So, the lowest hanging fruit we have control over is our physiology. Mm-hmm. Our emotions are, we feel all this without awareness in what's going on with us in that moment. Our actions will be guided by that whatever's coming through us, and that's not bad. But just to be aware in the moment, like if you're overwhelmed with a sense of whatever it is, can you sit there? Can you regulate? A simple meditation. I'm worried to say the word meditation.
Breath work. I think you talked about Andrew Huberman in another one. I read some of your stuff. Yeah. Right.
It just like that's the lowest hanging fruit. Like begin to change the way you breathe, slower, deeper through your nose. Like just simple, couple of breaths. Like see how that changes things for you. Breathe fully. Like that's where you start. In my experience, anyway. Like begin to get some control in the chaos that's within your inner environment. Second thing, when you start to look at identity, and I'm not a psychologist. I've spoken to lots of psychologists within my network, and psychotherapists within my network, like friends and former colleagues. And, one, to make sure that I'm staying within my tracks of what I'm doing, but two, to get their perspective and insight. And for me, the best way I understand identity now is really looking at, okay, turn them into stories in a way. Like, well, for me, a story was, well, if I don't work in sport, I won't be considered successful. For example, you could take that, then that's a story. That's a story I was telling myself. There's no basis to that truth whatsoever. It was just what I was using to make myself feel better. In a way, coach, the people that love you do not care what you do. They care that you're happy, healthy, and present. Like that's literally it. They don't care. They care that you're enjoying it, but they don't. That isn't why someone's a partner or married to you. That isn't why your child will not look at you any better if you're doing something else. As long as I think, you touched on it, embodiment. You're doing whatever you're doing with full presence and full integrity. That's what stands out to me now, anyway, about the people that inspire me. It's not what they do. So you could be leading a massive organization. You could be cleaning the streets. If you're doing that with full integrity and presence in that moment, that to me stands out a whole mile. It's not the words we say, it's the actions that we do. And so looking at that story, the stories we put around us, another one would be, I'm only successful if I'm working with winning teams. Again, like what is winning? There's so many variables that contribute to winning and losing that are outside of our, you could do, and so focus on the process, a cliche to say that, but have you done everything within your capability to turn up on the day to be your best version? And that also includes rest. That also includes kind of recovery, optimizing that in the most optimal way. Sometimes mean doing less.
Yeah.
But I would say, once the process, if you've done that, then it's just, okay, just enjoy the game and enjoy the result. And I think looking at really there are two questions to this. They're twins. So what is success? Defining what is success. Like I said, that paraphrase, it's easy to gauge success on wins, on medals, on tournament wins, whatever. But what are your personal inner drivers to success? I can tell you from me, the conversation I've had is based on connection. It's based on relationships. It's based on belonging in a department. And so that's going to be very individual. But I would really drive people to, well, what is your measure of success? Why is that measure of success? And then the twin of that is, well, what is sacrifice? So what are you willing to sacrifice? Now, sport does require sacrifice. And what I mean by that is most sports are played at the weekend or evenings. So social events, if you're working in professional sport, you will be working when most people are off. That's just the nature of it. And so I can accept that sacrifice is around tournaments, is around major competitions, is around training camps. That's just the nature of it. You're away from home, you're working longer hours, but then you come back to a normal rhythm of working. Compare that to what many stories I've heard is the idea that someone feels like they need to be first in, last out. That it's a 24/7 mentality. And I would look at that, in extreme cases. I know a couple of coaches who have questioned they feel that skewed dedication, which skewed loyalty, has cost them the idea of children, cost them their marriage, has cost them being a present parent. It's too late when the kids are 10, 11, because they're all the bonding, And so, yeah, what is success? What is sacrifice? And the last thing I'll say on that, if I can remember it, just gone out of my head, is how do you recognize that you're too far out?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, there's as you're talking, I'm just I don't know about you, Justin, but I'm just journeying back on my own, coaching career, and so many things that you've said there. What are you willing to sacrifice, and where are your values? Like that whole point of even, I got to be the first Serena, and I got to be the guy that make sure the door's locked when you leave, and just so much of your identity gets wrapped up in that. But I've also been outside of sport, operating, in a business. I've had the opportunity to be a chaplain for, some successful sports teams. And the same thing applies there, right? Like I wanted to be the best chaplain. I wanted to be the best businessman. And so I know that there's going to be some of our listeners out there that they don't coach hockey. Maybe they've never played hockey or sport. Their identity is, in their business. And I don't think really it changes. The stuff that we're talking about right now really is applicable to every area of our lives, whether it's being a great husband or a great business person or, a great mother. There's all these elements of that. You're wrestling with yourself is really, at the end of the day, I think our biggest problem, if I could say it just bluntly, is we have an identity crisis in the world, right? Yeah. And we continually crash onto the rock of reality, and then we sit there all banged up in life, and we ruin people around us. And so the work you're doing right now, Richard, with Men Behind Sport is very powerful stuff. And I just want to encourage our listeners out there that everything that Richard is talking about isn't just about men in sport. It's people in life. And so if you're listening out there today and you find yourself just, drifting and not really sure what your purpose is, I think that there's some great advice, and maybe even as we work towards the end of our show here, Richard, maybe we can kind of steer some of our conversation in that is like, how do I and Justin and our listeners move towards some recovery steps? Like, you've given us some really good things here, but if we do now recognize that, like, we're not aligned, trying to figure out what we want to sacrifice, what are some now next steps to rebuilding that and really finding that true purpose?
So I think there's a few levels that I see this through. Not for 1 minute am I saying we all need to leave our jobs and leave sport and go and live in a beautiful, secluded forest somewhere, which would be lovely. But in the Rockies. But
Yeah.
I would say, like, in an environment, one of the things that stands out so much are assumptions. We're kind of saying, like, the assumption would be, if I say this, it will cause problems. If I stand up for what I want, it'll fear a reprisal. If I say what I want to change, it'll look like I'm complaining, or I'm not good enough, or I can't handle it. Now, that's all assumptions. So I would say, like, the first point of call is, or does anyone know how you feel? Now, in a very heavily male-dominated environment, for example, I know, generally speaking, I know that there'll still be probably men with a mindset, an old-fashioned mindset, and all I mean by that is suck it up. Mm-hmm. Big boys don't cry. Come on, be a man. Like, that's out there still. That's not pointing blame. Yep. That's just people at where they are at. But I would say, like, if that's what if you express how you feel and you want, like, how could anyone judge you for saying, look, I need to be at home more to see my wife. I need to be at home with my partner. I need to be at home more to be with my children. I need to be home more for my mental health, or not even home. Like, I need to get a bit more of a space here. I need to look after myself a little bit here. Because if you think about it, if we're not looking after ourselves and we've got this 24/7 mindset, on one, you can look at it from the well-being side, mental health, but on the two, on, the people who pay the bills, the return on investment, if someone is fatigued, decision-making is lowered. Like, the quality of decision-making is lowered. Like, the dealing with pressure is lowered. Like, it's just, like, athletes suffer that. And so why would coaches not suffer that, and practitioners? And so you've got, yes, the well-being, but also decision-making. Like, it's compromised. And so understanding what you need, like, really has some deep reflection on what you need, is a good place to start. And then approaching people you trust at work to say, look, this is what I need, and I need this because of my family, or I need this for my sanity, or whatever it is. Like, just being the first, it takes courage to do that. If you feel you can't be, or for whatever reason, or the environment doesn't support you, that rejects what you're saying, then the next question I would say is, well, what are you pretending not to know? Like, the environment you're not aligned to the environment. So what is keeping you there? Of course, the salary, you've talked about that. Okay, but can you get another job? Yeah. Okay, well, you can get another job within sport, or if you're not in sport, like, you can get another job. And it might not be what your mind wants, but what does your heart want? And I say that, I used to think, what do you mean about heart? What do you mean by what your heart says? It's a very visceral feeling. And so an experiment to anyone listening, think of a situation that you're frustrated with, a person, maybe you're having a bit of conflict, maybe it's a job you're going to, maybe it's a situation you go to regularly that frustrates you. So you've got the idea of frustration, but how does that feel in your body? If you invite you to close your eyes if you want to, like, how does that feel? What do you feel? So for me, if I'm going through a situation that's frustrating, there's a closing, there's a slight contraction, there's a tenseness within my body. Now change that then and think about, well, what environment do you love to go to? What gives you energy? And so what's going on for your body? There's a lightness in me. There's an expansion. Like, it's subtle, but that's what I kind of tune into to help me make a decision. And I think, when we lead with our heart or an authentic decisions, it's often not the easiest decision, because our minds want a certain thing, but our hearts maybe want something different. And it's courageous to take that step, and if you're pretending not to know the things if you keep thinking this situation is going to change, I just need to do this much more work, or I need to prove myself a little bit more, like, you're not listening to yourself. And that's the challenge of inner reflection and taking responsibility for your environment. If you're happy to stay the same, then you have to accept it. If you're not happy to stay the same, then it's time to find a different route out. And I would say there's so many transferable skills, one from coaches, but two, I think this is where it comes down. It's important to come into purpose, and so much is said about purpose. But I do think it comes to that reflection of what is it what is it you want to achieve? And I don't see that as outcomes. It's a way of being. Like, do you want to inspire people? I say most coaches do want to inspire people, want to improve, help people develop. And so if you get clear on your purpose statement, then you can take away sport and then you can apply it anywhere. Like, what are the qualities that give you energy? What are the qualities that lift you? Because then you can take it up and put it in any environment you want. Yes, you can stay in sport if there is an environment. Then I do believe there are some really good environments in sport still. Maybe, even this one, many coaches get stuck in a certain sport rather than looking at different sports. And I would say, that the easily transferable skills there as a S&C coach, or even as a technical coach in hockey, you're really good at looking at movement. You're really good at looking at how body moves and how to create change in athletes, and so don't undervalue that. Yes, we can hone it into a very specific sport, but I know coaches who transfer different sports successfully as well at a top level. And when they would have thought before, like I know a hockey coach who went to rugby. Just to give you a couple of ideas, like I think but it does start with being completely honest with yourself, and that's, you are in control of your experience, and that is an intimidating and scary place, and it's also very empowering, I think.
Yeah.
Because last thing I'll say, where there's resistance, and this is my experience, when I stepped away from, my example, when I stepped away from sport, or thinking about stepping away from sport and to work for myself and my wife, when I started to dig down deep into it, I did see that the athletes I was working with was giving me a veneer. Oh, Richard, he works with these athletes or that athletes. Like I was hiding behind a team and a badge. And the realization, like, well, I'm keeping myself trapped here because I'm staying here because it's kept making a part of me feel safe and good enough. If I go on my own, my wife, all of a sudden it's Richard Husseiny. And it was just, that realization alone was like, well, I'm not willing to do that sacrifice of my life anymore to stay in a place that keeps me a little bit safer, or what my perception is safer. I need to live life. And I think that's where the power of grief comes in, and seeing loved ones pass away, as many spiritual traditions will talk about reflection or meditating on death. And that might sound morbid to start with, but in fact, what that's done is, the inevitability of all of us will face. It's allowed me to live my life. Well, how do I want to live then? And have that, get inner courage and strength to go, well, no, this is more important than that. This is. So yeah, just little insights on how I think around that.
Well, that's good. I appreciate your transparency with us, and even just, sort of the genesis of, that care that you provided for your mother, and how that sparked some transformation in your journey. Part of our podcast, we like to have an episode within it. It's called Grandpa B Story Time, and I want to sort of pass on Grandpa B Story Time, and I want to ask my co-host here, Justin, I know that you've had some of these aha moments in your life, and maybe even just recently you've alluded to a couple of years ago, and some different things. Like what are some things where you, Justin, have kind of processed some of the same stuff that Richard's talking about in your journey, and even whether it's through Prairie Hockey Academy or just in your life, that aha moment of like, I got to stop living by these assumptions and really grab life.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Barrett. Yeah, Richard, I think we, as we approached you coming on the podcast, I, mentioned to you just a lot of your work just really spoke to me and some of my own journey in some ways. And I think, a couple of years ago, I probably had my first panic attack about 4 years ago in some of this, and just some strong anxiety issues. And a couple of years ago, it kind of resurfaced and got pretty bad, where I actually found myself almost unable to even walk into the arena, just so much strain in it, right? And it was, a lot of this is, built, as you reflect on it, you recognize the story, right? That, as you talked about, right? The story we're telling ourselves, and the assumptions that we make based on those stories that we tell ourselves. We're such great storytellers, and these lies, they scream at you, and they're very loud. And sometimes we put a lot of pressure of this idea of like first one in, last one out, that's expected, but nobody's expecting that actually. People want you to be healthy and happy, and we put a lot of these expectations and weight on ourselves, and I found, through this process of defining what I wanted for myself and for my family and my future, it did require me to maybe hire a couple more staff members. So there was some financial sacrifice there that was involved to be able to offload some of that work. And at the same time, in this letting go process, your ego gets in the way at times, because it's all of a sudden, it still happens. It's a weekly process for me where it's a reflection. It's an important reason why I keep a journal and I write, because I get to reflect on, why am I feeling this way all of a sudden again, right? What's pulling at me? I wasn't invited to this team's event. Why wasn't I? Am I not needed there? And I'm like, wait a second. Here I am feeling left out, but I'm actually at home with my 3 children, and it's 6:00 on a Tuesday evening. Why do I feel left out? Isn't this where I'd rather be? Right. So I still, wrestle at times with that, and recognizing that it's not always easy to let go, right? When you're in this transition period and you're wondering where's your worth, and as you're searching for that, and so it's never, it's a journey for me still. I still use a coach personally and a mentor, because I know it's the process that I want for my life, and then I'm as part of it too, I'm intentional about meeting with other coaches or our staff or things, and asking these questions of them too, because I want to create an environment for us, just even at Prairie Hockey Academy, where our coaches understand their identity and what they're investing into it, and what their purpose is, and why they're doing it, and how is their family doing, and how's their spouse, and making sure that they're staying present in those spots, because don't do what I did, right? In so many ways, I like to say. But so thanks, Barrett. That's a short excerpt of my story and why I think today meant a lot. Inside Out Coaching by Joe Ehrmann was a really good book, and he talks about, I'd say it's almost a 100 level course when I think about it now, because he talks about every coach needs to ask, why do I coach? Why do I coach the way I coach? What does it feel like to be coached by me? How do I define success? And he'll talk lots about, we all coach just how we were coached, because we don't know how to coach any other way than how we were coached. And most of us get into coaching because we were part of that sport, and we get into it with some idea of why we're into it, but we've actually never asked these questions and done any inside reflective work. And I think these were really good questions. And I always say to all our coaching staff that we hire, I ask these questions in an interview process, and I want them to reflect and journal it. But I think the next 200, 300, or maybe 400 level university grad course is kind of what you've really dug into here, and just asking a lot deeper, like over and above those things. It's like, why do I think this way, right? And it's a much more internal, reflective side. And defining success is important, but even defining the sacrifice, I think was really good. And I think you left that with our listeners today. And there's so much more, Richard, we could have got into today, and I know we're running out of time. And I know you're actually launching your podcast today on January 2nd, the Untapped Potential podcast, where you're going to dive a lot deeper with practitioners and support staff of high performance teams. And do you want to plug that real quick before we say bye to our listeners?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So the Untapped Potential podcast releases today. So the first one is me just saying my why to men behind sport, and then the practitioner that it kind of really it's the stuff that no one talks about. Well, it's these conversations. It's more of these conversations from people, from coaches, practitioners, S&Cs, kind of the whole bandwidth. It's nothing to do with the technical elements. It's all to do with the person, and really looking at the person behind the role. So yes, all right, you're a head coach, okay, but who are you? Where are your struggles? How have you got through that? What do you see within sport that needs to change? Because the untapped potential is called that because, from what I've heard, there's so many environments are not allowing the staff, the support staff, to give their full potential because of all this human stuff that gets in the way. And so if we can start, I believe, if we start to have more conversations that we don't want to have out and open, it's going to allow people to start to notice. Go back to what I said at the start. Before 2014, I couldn't see any of this at all. I thought I was just leading the way in something, in my own story, But and I think kind of more people who can kind of just, and the fact that you guys are doing this is so exciting to me, because these conversations are happening more and more, and I think there is a shift coming. There is a shift happening now in what societally, but also in sport, in a microcosm of sport, things are changing, and I think there's a different way coming. And you said at the start, that somatic leadership. I think that is what's coming. Like it's not this hierarchical top-down dictatorship type thing. It's this embodiment. It's this felt sense of belonging, security, connection, trust. Like the human part is coming back, and I'm so excited to hear it. So that's really what the Untapped Potential is trying to support.
So good. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you taking time out today. All the best to you in 2024 as we've mentioned, you're launching that series of podcasts today, and hopefully have a great run with it and impact people all over the world. We're thankful that our listeners could just, I almost feel like this was like the three of us having coffee at a restaurant, just talking about our lives. And so I'm thankful that our listeners just sort of get to be at the table beside us and listen in, because it to our listeners, this is really where the rubber hits the road. Like we can sit here and talk about, we've got these podcasts, we've got these influence with our academy and with Richard with his work, but really at the end of the day, this is real stuff that we're all dealing with, and just really encourage everyone to start to dig into a bit of this on your own. Like, dig into what your identity is and what your purpose is in life. And from there you can start to build out other stuff. So we're thankful for Justin, for all that you've accomplished in, getting the academy to where it's at. There's lots of really cool things. Just recently, earlier in December, we've talked a lot about how, we've got our license renewed and just some joy and excitement with that. Now we got this fresh 3-year window. Our teams are successful, but really at the end of the day, all the stuff that we've just talked about here for the last hour is really where it's at and what we want to be doing with our lives. So thank you for helping us unpack that today, Richard. And we're really thankful that we get to journey along with you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. I would say on that, last thing I'll say is, it requires space to get clear on your purpose. So if you've got no space during the day, you're back to back all day long, you're never gonna sense it. It's not an idea. It's matching the feeling for me anyway. It's matching the feeling with the words. It's really, it hasn't got to be grandiose. It's just got to be true for you. And I think you need space to be able to reflect. That's
right. Same thing in hockey. I'm sure same thing in European football. You need time and space to be creative.
There you go. Yeah.
That's right. No, that's great. Richard, thank you. I got a big belief that healthy, whole people will change the world. And so thanks for investing in that to create men behind sport that are healthy and whole.
And thank you to our listeners. You've been sitting at the coffee table beside us, listening on to the podcast today of the Win All Day Everyday podcast. We encourage you to hit the like button. Make sure you share this episode with your family and friends, and also dig deeper. And we'll put the link there for Richard's podcast so that you can also be sharing and listening in on his journey. So thank you for taking time out of your day today to give us a listen. And we look forward to having a great 24 with you listening to our podcast and others around the world. Thank you for your time.